Story 1. Story 1, The Whispering Feast. Thanksgiving had always been complicated. My family, a tangled knot of unspoken resentments and forced smiles, gathered every year at my grandmother's decaying Victorian house in upstate New York. The house itself breathed an unsettling history, its shadowed corners whispering secrets I never wanted to hear. This year felt different, heavier. The air hung thick with an unnatural stillness, the usual cacophony of aunts and uncles replaced by hushed tones and nervous glances. The crisp autumn air, usually vibrant with the scent of burning leaves, carried a metallic tang I couldn't place. "Everything all right, Mom?" I asked, noticing the tremor in her hand as she poured gravy over the dry, overcooked turkey. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, dear. Just a bit tired." But I knew it was more than that. Everyone seemed off. Uncle George, normally boisterous and backslapping, sat silently picking at his food. Aunt Susan, the family gossip, kept glancing towards the darkened hallway, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Even the children, usually a whirlwind of energy, sat subdued, their eyes wide and unblinking. Dinner progressed in a strained silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic clicking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Each tick felt like a hammer blow against the fragile facade of normalcy. Then the whispering started. Faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, it gradually grew louder, a chorus of sibilant voices murmuring just beyond the edge of hearing. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to my sister, Sarah. She nodded, her face pale. "It's the house," she breathed, her eyes wide with terror. "It always does this." I tried to rationalize it, to attribute it to the creaking old pipes or the wind whistling through the drafty windows, but the intensity of the whispers grew, weaving themselves into the fabric of the room, into the very air we breathed. They seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere, a constant, insidious presence. Later, as we cleared the table, a chilling draft swept through the dining room, extinguishing the flickering candles and plunging us into darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by a frantic scramble for matches. When the lights finally came back on, Grandma was gone. Panic flared in my chest. "Where's Grandma?" I cried, my voice laced with a fear I couldn't control. No one answered. Their faces, illuminated by the harsh overhead light, were masks of blank terror. It was then that I noticed the empty chair at the head of the table wasn't just empty. It was different. Smaller. Like a child's chair. The whispering intensified, morphing into a chilling chant, the words indistinct yet undeniably menacing. I could feel it now, a cold, oppressive presence closing in on us, suffocating us with its unseen weight. We searched the house, calling out Grandma's name, our voices echoing through the empty, shadowed rooms. But there was no sign of her. The house seemed to hold its breath, listening, watching. As the hours dragged on, the atmosphere grew thicker, heavier, the whispers a constant, throbbing pulse in the back of my mind. The faces of my family, contorted by fear and uncertainty, began to blur, their features shifting, becoming unfamiliar. Then, just as dawn began to break, we found her. Not in the house, but in the garden, sitting beneath the ancient oak tree, her eyes wide open, staring up at the sky. She wasn't breathing. But it wasn't her stillness that chilled me to the bone. It was the small, crudely fashioned doll clutched in her hand. A doll made of twigs and leaves, its face a grotesque parody of a child's smile. And as I stared at that horrifying effigy, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. We left the house that morning, a fractured, haunted family, carrying the weight of unanswered questions and unspoken fears. We never went back. The house stands empty now, a decaying monument to a Thanksgiving we'll never forget. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I can still hear the whispering. Faint, sibilant voices, calling my name. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the doll. Its vacant eyes staring back at me, its twisted smile promising a horror yet to come. Story 2. Story 2, The Empty Chairs. Thanksgiving, 2007. The aroma of roasted turkey and cinnamon-spiced apple cider hung heavy in the air of my grandmother's Victorian farmhouse. Outside, the wind howled through the skeletal branches of the elm trees, a mournful symphony against the backdrop of the grey November sky. Inside, the familiar chaos of family gatherings swirled, the clinking of silverware against china, the murmur of conversations, the occasional eruption of laughter. It was supposed to be a celebration. It felt wrong. My grandmother, frail but sharp-witted as ever, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her gaze sweeping over us as if taking a mental inventory. My parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, they were all there, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight. Yet, a sense of unease prickled my skin. It was subtle, like a draft in a closed room. "Everything all right, dear?" Mom asked, her hand brushing my arm. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "Just tired," I lied. I couldn't articulate the feeling, this gnawing emptiness that seemed to expand with each passing minute. Dinner began, the usual Thanksgiving rituals unfolding, the passing of dishes, the expressions of gratitude, the forced joviality. But beneath the surface, something was amiss. The laughter felt hollow, the conversation strained. I caught glimpses of anxiety in the eyes of my relatives, fleeting expressions they quickly masked with smiles. As the evening progressed, the unease intensified. I started noticing small discrepancies, things out of place. A chair pulled out from the table, empty, as if someone had just gotten up. A half-eaten plate of food left abandoned. A whisper I couldn't quite decipher from the hallway. I dismissed them as tricks of the light, the product of a tired mind. But the unsettling feeling persisted, growing into a knot of dread in my stomach. After dinner, I excused myself and went for a walk outside, hoping the crisp air would clear my head. The wind whipped against my face, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and something else, something metallic, faintly acrid. I followed the gravel path towards the back of the property, where a dense thicket of trees bordered the edge of a cornfield. The rustling of leaves in the wind sounded like whispers, and I felt a chilling certainty that I was being watched. I turned back towards the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. As I neared the back porch, I saw a figure standing in the kitchen window. It was silhouetted against the light, tall and slender, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. A wave of terror washed over me. I froze, unable to breathe. The figure vanished. I stumbled into the house, my voice trembling as I called out for my family. The kitchen was empty. The dining room was empty. The entire house was eerily silent, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I raced from room to room, calling out their names, but there was no answer. They were gone. The table was still set, the remnants of the Thanksgiving feast untouched. But the chairs were all empty. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The police investigation yielded nothing. My family vanished without a trace, leaving behind a void that echoed with the silence of their absence. I returned to the farmhouse countless times, searching for clues, for some explanation, but found only the chilling emptiness and the lingering scent of that metallic, acrid odor. I still celebrate Thanksgiving. I set the table, prepare the meal, trying to recreate the warmth and familiarity of those past gatherings. But every year, as I sit at the head of the table, surrounded by empty chairs, the unease returns, the chilling reminder of that Thanksgiving night when my world fractured, leaving me with nothing but a haunting question: where did they go? The wind still howls through the skeletal branches of the elm trees. The scent of decay lingers in the air. And I wait, listening for the sound of their return, knowing, deep in the marrow of my bones, that something is still out there. Watching. Waiting. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent, I can almost hear the whispers coming from the cornfield, beckoning me towards the darkness, promising answers that I'm not sure I want to hear. The whispers sound like my name. Story 3. Story 3, The Feast. Thanksgiving, 2008. Grandma Rose's farmhouse. The air, thick with the scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon, usually brought a sense of comfort. But this year, a creeping unease settled over me like a shroud. "Sarah, honey, "Could you fetch the cranberry sauce from the cellar?" Aunt Carol asked, her voice cutting through the chatter of relatives. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Grandma Rose's cellar had always been unsettling. Dark, damp, and smelling of earth and something vaguely off. "Sure, Aunt Carol," I forced a smile, grabbing the flickering lantern from the hook by the door. The stairs creaked ominously under my weight, each step amplifying the silence that had suddenly fallen over the house. The air grew colder, damper, and the earthy smell intensified, mingling with something metallic, something sickly sweet. The cellar was shrouded in darkness, the lantern casting long, dancing shadows that contorted into grotesque shapes. Rows of dusty jars lined the shelves, their contents murky and unidentifiable. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. A low growl rumbled from the far corner of the cellar. My breath hitched in my throat. I swung the lantern, the weak light barely penetrating the gloom. Nothing. Just shadows. "Just your imagination, Sarah," I whispered to myself, my voice shaky. I spotted the cranberry sauce on a low shelf, almost hidden behind a stack of ancient-looking books bound in dark leather. As I reached for it, another growl, louder this time, vibrated through the stone floor, sending a shiver down my spine. My hand brushed against something cold and slimy. I recoiled, my heart leaping into my throat. The lantern light flickered, revealing a thick, dark substance clinging to the shelf. It pulsed, almost as if it were alive. Panic seized me. I snatched the cranberry sauce and turned to flee, but a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, gaunt, its skin a sickly pale green, its eyes glowing with an unnatural red light. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in claws that dripped with the same dark, pulsating substance. It didn't move, just stood there, watching me, its glowing eyes burning into my soul. A guttural growl emanated from its throat, a sound that seemed to vibrate the very foundations of the house. The air grew heavy, the scent of decay overwhelming the aroma of Thanksgiving dinner. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the creature. My mind screamed, but my voice was trapped, a prisoner in my terror-stricken body. "Sarah? Everything all right down there?" Uncle John's voice called from the top of the stairs. The creature's head snapped towards the sound, its red eyes blazing with an intensity that made my blood run cold. It let out a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. Then, with a speed that defied logic, it lunged towards the stairs. I screamed, a primal scream born of pure terror, and scrambled up the stairs, my legs trembling, my heart pounding like a drum. I burst through the cellar door, slamming it shut behind me, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent house. "Sarah! What's wrong?" Aunt Carol rushed towards me, her face etched with concern. I stared at her, my breath coming in ragged gasps, unable to speak. The other relatives gathered around, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. There's something in the cellar," I finally managed to stammer, my voice shaking uncontrollably. They looked at me, their expression shifting from concern to skepticism. Uncle John chuckled nervously. "Sarah, you must have scared yourself down there. It's just an old house, lots of strange noises." He reached for the cellar door, but I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into his flesh. "No. Don't open it," I pleaded, my voice raw with terror. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Sarah, there's nothing down there," he said, his voice firm. He pushed my hand away and opened the door. The cellar was dark, silent. The only sound was the faint flicker of the lantern I had left behind. "See?" "Nothing," Uncle John said, stepping into the cellar. He picked up the lantern, shining it around. "Just your imagination." He turned back to us, a reassuring smile on his face. Then, his smile faltered. His eyes widened, his face draining of color. He looked behind him, his gaze fixed on something we couldn't see. His mouth opened, as if to scream, but no sound came out. Then, he began to tremble, his body convulsing violently. His skin turned a sickly pale green, his eyes glowed with an unnatural red light. He turned back to us, his face twisted into a grotesque parody of a smile. His lips moved, forming words we couldn't understand. Then, he let out a deafening roar, the same roar I had heard in the cellar. The scent of decay filled the air, overwhelming the aroma of Thanksgiving dinner. The other relatives screamed, their faces etched with horror. I stood there, frozen, watching as Uncle John changed. His limbs elongated, his fingers twisting into claws. The same dark, pulsating substance began to drip from his fingertips. He lunged towards us, his red eyes burning with an unholy light. The screams of my relatives echoed through the house, a symphony of terror. I turned and ran, fleeing into the cold November night, leaving behind the screams, the stench of decay, and the horrifying image of my family feasting. I haven't gone back since. I don't know what happened to them, to Grandma Rose's farmhouse. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it, the roar, echoing in my dreams, reminding me of the Thanksgiving feast that turned into a nightmare. And I wonder, what feasts on them now?